I'm going to introduce our first speaker, George Drapeau, and he's going to give us the benefit of the CIC's perspective and involvement in infrastructure certainly from the statewide level down. George?
Thank you, Albert. Welcome. Thank you all for having me. Let me just try to unpack the Washington picture as we see it in the construction industry. Just as a description of the Construction Industry Council, we are the collective bargaining agent for the contractors with the labor unions. So in effect, we are at the core of the construction activity in the 7-county downstate region of Westchester and Lower Hudson Valley. So we represent the highway builders, the roads, bridges, tunnels, sewers. Anything that runs horizontally is usually paid for with ratepayers or taxpayer money, fare-based utility users. That's paid with a public approbation. The vertical world, which many of you live in, is paid with private money, interest rate sensitive, vacancy rate sensitive. We also represent the builders, folks who are putting up the high-rises, the hotels, the condos, the apartment houses and such. So we see both worlds. We see the horizontal and we see the vertical world. And to have that description, we represent the contractors, heavy highway, building contractors, masonry yards, and supply yards, and so on. Okay, so Washington. Washington was really a fall-down flight of stairs right now. Had they started with transportation and the big $1 trillion infrastructure program, we'd be in a different place right now. But they didn't. They started with healthcare, and that failed. And out of healthcare, they were going to find the funds to fund tax reform. And they didn't. So they found the funds for tax reform through what they did to SALT and states like New York and New Jersey and Connecticut and so on. But they also found through the repatriation of the funds that were sitting overseas that corporations weren't bringing back, $600 billion plus. So that was a loss of money that we could have used for infrastructure that never came our way. So they didn't do health care. They had to do tax reform. They did tax reform with the money offshore and then asking us to pay for it in certain sectors of the country. And now we're moving into infrastructure and they don't have any money. So where are they going to get it? Well, he's come up with this idea of $1 trillion, and it's, the Hunger Games. Have any of you guys watched any of these Hunger Games shows where you basically have to put in to get back? And so it's the states that are going to be putting in the most money, the projects that have the highest rating will get the funding from the feds. But it's going to be our money going into the project. So that doesn't bode well for states that are cash-strapped and states that have to pay for big projects, like the state of Rhode Island. It's tiny, but the New England Thruway runs through it. And so they take Westchester County. They have this little stretch of the New England Thruway, and it's used by everybody in the country. However, New York has to bear up and take care of it. So it's very painful for states like us to participate in this Hunger Game concept. And so I don't think it's going to work. And from what we see in Washington, it isn't working because everybody's balking on it right now. So it remains to be seen. $1 trillion, that's a big number. We've been to Washington several times. We're talking really about clean water. The clean water issue to us is the most important. When you look at employment in the downstate region, the governor really delivered a jobs program with the Tappan Zee Bridge. We've had 6,000 people working on it, a $4 billion project. I personally have been working on it since 1988, 29 and a half years. Believe it or not, Bill Hennessy, and God rest his soul, and happy St. Patrick's Day to you, Bill. He was former chairman of the New York State Thruway Authority, former commissioner of DOT, and back in September of 1988, we are in a back room at Sleepy Hollow High School, which was then North Tarrytown, and we're holding a public hearing on a toll increase on the Ardsley toll on the Thruway and Spring Valley. And you have to have these public hearings. And you hear the stakeholders come and they give their reports and say why you should raise the toll 25% or not, 25 cents or not. So Bill turns to us, and Ross Pecky's in the room, I'm in the room, a couple other guys from the Construction Industry Council, and he says, you know, boys, we got to start thinking about replacing that Tappan Zee Bridge. We got to start tonight now. So this is 1988, 33 years after the original bridge has been put up. And we looked at it and I said, what are you talking about? We just, this thing's fresh. He says, it's going to take you 30 years to replace that bridge. Now, what was that word you used, Al? Prescient? Prescient. Past, prescient, and future. Right. He was so prescient. He could see through administrations. He could see through the Cuomo administration. He could see through Pataki. He could see through Spitzer. He could see through Patterson. He could see through where we are today. He could see administrations in Washington come and go. And he said, it's going to take you 30 years. It's going to be opened 30 years to the week when he said we have to start working on replacing the bridge. I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about how prescient he is, or was. So, anybody been across the Tappan Zee Bridge? Yeah? Okay, well, who hasn't been across the Tappan Zee Bridge? Jeff, I would suggest you go home via the Tappan Zee Bridge tonight. Okay. Okay, guys, you ain't seen nothing yet. It is absolutely spectacular. First of all, I'm all for the Mario Cuomo Bridge. I love the name because Mario put money. It's not the Pete Seeger Bridge. Come on. No, Mario Cuomo put money in the budget when there wasn't money to be had to fund the studies, to do the task force, to do all those things that were needed for that infrastructure project. And he was an infrastructure guy. You know, remember the 287 across Westchester? That was originally DOT, and they sold it to the Thruway Authority to manage it because the Thruway Authority has the bonds, so we could get revenue to pay. So he took money off 287 from Thruway and put it into the state budget to build other things. So he really was a master builder. You may not like the debt load in New York State, but he got it done. So that's why I'm in favor of the Mario Cuomo Bridge. And don't cross me on that, please. So that's a big project, and you really haven't seen anything yet. It is so spectacular when you go across that bridge, and it's just one span now. You know, the second span is, the whole project is 91% complete. It's going to be done sometime in the middle of the summer, and because I know we have an election in November, it will conveniently have a ribbon cutting somewhere in October. So you know that everybody's going to enjoy this one. But it's 91% complete. The transportation aspects of it haven't even been realized. Bus rapid transit, high occupancy vehicle lanes, breakdown lanes, light rail, commuter rail. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface on what's going to happen because of that bridge. So this bodes well for transportation through the corridor, which is really kind of a big issue. If I could just, how much time do I have?
You got another 3 minutes.
3 minutes, oh my God. Okay, 3 minutes. So, how do you get to Westchester? Well, you get to Westchester several ways. New England Thruway, the infrastructure there is, the final project is being led to complete from the Bronx line to Connecticut. That's going to be about $150 million, and that's going out shortly. Yonkers Contracting has a big project up in Brewster, where the 684, 84 meet, their drainage realignment, lane widening, pavement improvements. That brings people in and out of Westchester. Of course, anybody who's traveled the parkways, you've seen the Sawmill River Parkway with the bridge work that's done. That's a blend of county and state money. That's Ashford Avenue. They've had bridge work over at Chappaqua. Fabulous work that they're doing. E. Cruz down at the Hutchinson River Parkway on East 3rd Street in Mount Vernon. They're doing bridge work there and making that roadway better. I went through there today and I just flew right through. It was fabulous. So they're managing it well. The last thing I will say is that the Construction Industry Council has been very involved in trying to get more money into the region to upgrade our sewer, our water, and our water protection programs. New York City, as you know, is the largest municipality in the world that has unfiltered water. The reason it's unfiltered is because we have such a great reservoir system that creates this delicious water, and we don't need the high cost and expense and troubles of filtration. But in order to do that, you have to protect the water, and that means that you have to have safeguards. So, pollution control, that means capturing everything that runs off. So you have three silos. You have clean water, which is, let's say, drinking water, okay? And then you have wastewater that has to be treated. You have pumps, plants, and pipes for those systems. And then you have just runoff that goes into the rivers and lakes and streams. And so we need to capture that and protect it. So we've been involved with the governor's office. We have a $2.5 billion program. We're now moving into the second year of that, $500 million a year to upgrade the water infrastructure. And I have to commend Steve Otis, our assemblyman from the Mariah area. He's the one who dreamed up this, created the legislation and it's passed. So Westchester County gets a higher percentage than the rest of the state. For money, we get about 12% of that pie every year, whereas other parts of the state, the average is 9%. The reason we do that is our municipalities have become aware of the program thanks to the CIC and the Builders Institute. We are working hard to make the municipals know about this program so that they can apply for grants. So if you have and we probably have this discussion, if you have a municipal official that you know, elected official, or he works for a town or a village or the cities, remind them about this program, Clean Water Infrastructure Program, and that they should be applying for grants, because the more grants we apply for, 25% of them get funded with grant money, outright grants, or low-interest loans to move forward projects. So, to go to the real micro level, the town of North Castle has a need to upgrade its sewage treatment plant. And sewer district number 2, they need $11 million. We are going to get them 25% so that they can get to the finish line and fund the project. These are local jobs. These create great opportunities for employment locally with local contractors, local suppliers, local professionals. So we're working on the macro level, we're working on the state level, and we're working on the micro level in order to get the infrastructure improved. And just as a final note on the issue in Florida, that was self-cleaning concrete that they use. It's a new concrete concept. You have to ask yourself, why would a municipality want to avoid the cost of cleaning concrete? Well, obviously it's an expense. The taxpayers don't want to pay. And so elected officials are making these choices to be the low-cost provider of an infrastructure service to a community. I'm not sure that's the best way to go. I think the best course is being the best provider. So in the case of like the Tappan Zee Bridge, that's a design-build project. It was not a low bid. It happened to be the low bid, but they put it out as a design-build, which was the best bid. And we're going to see more of that as we go forward in the infrastructure renewal programs in New York State. So, thank you.
Very good. Next, I would like to call up my very dear friend Dolph Rotfeld, who will talk about some of the projects that he's been involved with over his many years in Westchester County and the metro area and nationally with his firm. Dolph?
Thank you very much. I was a member of this group a long time ago. We used to meet in basements someplace. And every once in a while, those of you who remember the Piedmont Inn, the stars there. The only person that I see here tonight is the guy who was very close to me. As a matter of fact, he was my landlord. I was a subtenant in that parish, fellow professional engineer and a great planner. And we worked a lot with him, and if you travel around Westchester County, the firm of Raymond Parish, Pine and Wiener, and Parish and Wiener, practically everything that you see about Route 119 and up around the Robert Martin's building and stuff was all yours, Matt. And but I want to talk about current infrastructure. He spoke about stuff that was above ground for the most part. I was once honored in a group, PE group, and Al Del Bello said that Dolph is like a doctor, he buries his mistakes. Probably one of you I did. But the thing is that what we're facing right now is some of the things that George talked about, and that is water and pollution. Those of you that may not know is that the groups like Save the Sound and the Hudson River Alliance are after getting sewage out of storm drains. And that is a difficult process. Citizens and communities, what they don't see for the most part, they're angry about paying for. And when you're rebuilding sewers, getting storm drains that carry pollution from sewers is a tough task. It means televising sewers, and it's like a colonoscopy inside sewers. And you find problems, you've got to solve them. And it's a long, tedious process. We've been, for example, in the village of Rochester, been doing this for about 6 years, because the EPA and the DEC have consent orders, they give you time. And when they're doing things and getting rid of the problems, they don't really get too much aggravation. They don't give you too much aggravation. But right now in Westchester County going on are investigations, and we're working in White Plains, Rybrook, Mount Kisco, Sleepy Hollow, Portchester, going after these things. And the areas around New Rochelle, Mamaroneck, Larchmont, just spent close to $4 million just investigating the problems with sewers. And for the most part, you have leakage. And a lot of it is now coming down to homeowners. And most of you here, either homeowners or running condominiums, is that they're now afraid that a lot of excess stormwater is getting into sewers from the laterals from the house to the sewer in the street. We've done some investigations, and in areas where there's high groundwater, yes, there is, because those pipes were put in, generally speaking, without supervision by government inspectors and so on. The plumbing inspector came around when it was done and looked at it and so on. And the joints is, most of these pipes that are now 50, 60, 70 years old were clay pipe. They're about 2.5 feet long, and they had a bell, and the pipe that fit into the bell. To make it leak-proof, they put rope around it and slash cement. Well, that lasts about maybe 30 years, and these pipes 50 years old. There was nothing in that joint, so any groundwater gets in and it creates the problems. The County of Westchester has legislation that the communities must follow, that they cannot exceed 150 gallons per person per day in the community. Any community, and they do flow monitoring of sewers. You exceed that, you have to do this work. So it's an expensive proposition. Government does have a program, hardly, probably less than 25% of the money that's needed, as George talked about, to fix these things. So communities now have to increase sewer rent, sewer taxes, and so on. And It's not going to be easy, it's going to get tougher, because a lot of these things that we find are in excess of this 150 gallons per capita. And I know most of you are thinking, where do they get 150 gallons per capita? We take a shower, we run the dishwasher, we run the washing machine, and we flush toilets. One of the problems when the contaminant in a toilet amounts to probably less than a quarter of a pint is flushed with 1.5 gallons. Something has to be done along those lines to help. The other problems are streets, paving of streets. Not money is being spent on that. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many of you drive 287, but last year, the state paved 287 from White Plains to the Hutch. And they did it very efficiently and very fast. They milled the lane and they paved that same lane that same night. So all night work. The only problem is when you do repair of that nature, where there are potholes that develop, mainly in the middle lanes where trucks drive. You see very few potholes in the left lane, maybe a little more on the right, but most of them are strictly where the wheel loads are in the middle lane. When you mill and pave, you don't solve the problem. Anybody driving that middle lane from White Plains to the Hutch sees the patches exactly where the potholes were 2 years ago. And so the money spent is going to have to be spent again. What I encourage you to tell your friends, everybody, to get after, as George said, get after your legislators, get more money towards fixing sewers, storm drains. I won't even touch water lines because that's a long conversation, all told. Thank you.
Can we ask questions or?
No, let's wait for the program to be over, then we can ask questions. And as befits the second most interesting man in the world, you can have the first question. Ralph Mastromonaco, civil engineer, and I'm sorry? Alumni. Okay, very good. Ralph.
I'm Ralph Mastromonaco. I'm a civil engineer, graduate degree in environmental engineering, and I was an alumni of Dolph Rotfeld. I have been doing engineering for probably 30 or 40 years, and all of it in Westchester, Summit, Putnam County, maybe a little Rockland. And I'm very interested in infrastructure, as you might guess, but to me, infrastructure is kind of like the weather. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. So, in my many years of with Dolph and working for the county and working as a consulting engineer for certain villages around and towns around Westchester, I think I finally come up with the reason why nothing gets done. And some people say it's all the regulations, which are certainly a problem. Regulations are made up by human beings. A lot of times there's just no rationale for those regulations. But beyond the regulations, it turns out that, in my opinion anyway, it's the regulators that are the biggest problem for, let's say, improving our lives through infrastructure. And I'm just going to tell you a quick story. My speech is only about 1 hour and 45 minutes, so.
And you've got 4 minutes.
We were doing a project along the Hudson River, and it was my client had an oil terminal, and he has an old building there with his offices in, and he wanted to build a brand new garage for his oil trucks. So we went to the regulations and we saw that, well, there's a little flood zone over there because it's near the Hudson River. So we had to put the garage and set it exactly at elevation 7 feet above sea level. I hope everyone knows what that means. So we submitted our plan, sent it to the OC. So we sent it to town, and the town, experts over there said, well, Ralph, the problem here is that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has just put out some new maps, and that elevation 7, on the new maps, it's now elevation 9. Oh. So you mean I have to raise this garage, parking lots at elevation 7, I have to raise it up to elevation 9. So, well, that's not too bad. Maybe I could do that. Of course, these big oil trucks have to get in there, so they have to ramp it to get into the, so it's a little bit of more disturbance, so on and so forth. And they said, well, really, that's only part of the bad news, Ralph. The other part of the bad news is that the state building code saw these new maps and these new reports by FEMA, and they want you to be 2 feet higher than the 9-foot elevation. So now my elevation is 7, now I'm 4 feet above the parking lot with this garage. And I said, wait a second, this can't be. So I actually looked into it. I didn't hear anyone else looking into this, but I decided to look into it. So it turned out that when FEMA came out with these brand new maps that showed all of these large elevations, well, New York City wasn't too happy about it because it affected Nassau County and Staten Island, areas along the Hudson, and they appealed to FEMA. They produced a really magnificent engineering document. I read it. And what it did was it pointed out how many errors there were in FEMA's analysis. Well, about a year later, Mayor de Blasio came out. They had made an agreement with FEMA that those maps were going to be put in a shelf somewhere. They were not going to be used. Well, now, I said, well, how did the state get there? Why did they add 2 feet? Well, it turns out we got all of the videos and minutes from the state building councilors up in Albany. It took a little while to do all this. But it turned out that the state raised their 2 feet because they looked at New York City's study, which had now been retracted. So I wrote to New York State. I took it upon myself, and I am appealing. I'm asking them. Well, now that New York City has, now that FEMA has withdrawn these maps, why don't you repeal this additional 2 feet that you put on to all buildings in that flood zone? So I can't say that I've received anything back yet. I doubt that we will, because the regulators, why should they? Unless maybe possibly an organization like this could get behind things like this, I think it would be helpful. And I'm reminded of, how difficult it is to get these projects built. And I remember President Obama, when he was just a young president, who actually had to admit that some of these shovel-ready jobs are not so shovel-ready. And I think that if we want to do infrastructure, we've got to get those shovel-ready jobs actually shovel-ready. And if there's a way to do it, the only way to do it really is to look at the regulations governing those projects. Thank you. That's all.
Well, maybe this is something, Ralph, maybe this is something that maybe both the CIC and the BRI can help you and get some organizational support for your position. And our last speaker is our colleague Cesare Manfredi, who, as I say, has several hats that I think have some interesting comments, both from the engineering side as well as the many other hats that he wears. Cesare Manfredi.
Good evening. When we talked about the bridge collapse in Florida, it just came back like a flash. Over 50 years ago, as a sophomore in Manhattan College Engineering, we were trying to lobby the math teacher to give us partial credit on these monster math problems. you know, you go 2 pages of math and you make a mistake in the last line and it's 25% off. So he looked at us and said, "You engineer, bridge fall down, no partial credit." That comes back to me in nightmares at times. Anyway, I'd like to talk about some of the things in the infrastructure that actually cost co-ops and condos money. The first thing is natural gas distribution. We have a dual system, natural gas and oil, and we buy from Con Ed in a, what's the term? It's a benefit for being coming offline if they can't meet the demand. I can't think of the term, it's a catchy little phrase. Anyway, we have 13 straight days on oil, and that's never happened before, and it just knocked the hell out of our budget because oil was so much more expensive than the natural gas. I'm not sure if it's the major pipelines that the state of New York refuses to approve, all 3 of them, or if it's a local distribution problem, and that there is adequate gas coming into the Northeast. I spoke to Albert about this, and Con Ed is a little busy right now. And maybe in the future we'll have a Con Ed person to talk about this natural gas problem, which costs a lot of money if you're on this discount service. And we did some calculations. Is the discount worth it if we're paying so much more for oil? But the discount is 12 months of the year, and we did the calculation, and it's still worth it to go with the discount to be able to switch when they ask us. By the way, the mechanical engineer must have got partial credit on his glasses. I haven't gotten it fixed yet. Flooding. And some of the parts of the county really get flooded. And Dolph was talking about the stormwater that finds its way into the sewage system. And just, you know, the order of magnitude of this problem. The Mamaroneck is designed for 22 million gallons a day of sewage. During a heavy rainfall, the flow meters pin at 60 million gallons. And so that's a lot of excess water getting in the system. The county has spent at least 2 or 3 times $25 million, and it's still going on, as Don said, to get the stormwater out of the sewer system, and it leaks because of what he talked about. And this all costs us money. And the sewage treatment plants, it's costing us a lot of money if you live on the Long Island Sound watershed, which is quite big. If you half of White Plains and Mount Vernon go to the Sound sewage treatment plants, and they've all been upgraded to treat for nitrogen. And when Ralph was talking about today's regulators, I agree with him. But since I worked as a regulator for 35 years and been retired for 18, the regulators in those days knew what they were doing. When we designed the level of nitrogen removal for Long Island Sound, and it was a graph. You spend a lot of money and get a lot of benefit. Spend a lot of money, get a lot of benefit. Then at the end, spend a lot of money and nothing. Spend a lot of money and nothing. And that's called the knee of the curve. And it was decided that even though we didn't get the amount of nitrogen theoretically that the engineering models said that you needed to get down to, could have spent money that nobody had to get to some empirical point that was just impossible from a money point of view. So it was a practical decision that when you spend a lot of money and a de minimis result was stopping. And those were the smart regulators back then. And there's a lot of that going on today with EPA, which I disagree with, that they're getting into this fine-tuning of things. I remember as a lawyer, we had a permit and there was a limit of, I won't get into the details, let's say there was a limit of 4 because engineering said 4 was more than enough to protect the water. He said, why did you make it 2? It's twice as good. I said, well, it costs 20 times as much and nothing will happen. And he just didn't understand this. And that's what's going on in some areas today. Flooding. Another aspect of flooding is streams and runoff. There are new state regulations. Thank you. I'm getting a little hoarse. I have a little throat also. New state regulations require any new construction to have the same rate of flow off the property as it was before you developed it. So you have to build detention basins and retention basins. But one of the things you can do as a retrofit, and many municipalities have started, Larchmont in my own village in Irvington did, they turned these old reservoirs that were no longer used into stormwater retention basins. Revamped the piping, put electronic valves on it that when you knew there was a rainstorm, you drain it a bit, and that first flush of water fills, and it works. Downtown Irvington doesn't get flooded, and Larchmont did it, and some other communities over there. The problem is the upstream communities are the problem, and the downstream communities are the ones that get hit. And Bronxville had many flooding problems, and one of the solutions could have used the old Springbrook Reservoir by the Springbrook Golf Course. And the trouble was, and this was a quote, when Yonkers was asked to fix the dam, those people in Bronxville don't vote in Yonkers. And that was 18 years ago. I just drove by and I saw some activity on the dam, and I hope they're fixing it so that the Springbrook Reservoir could be used as a flood control project.
We have an update for you on it.
I don't know, we'll see. Water, and yes, and that's why, by the way, your rates over in Long Island Sound have been so high, because of the massive upgrades at the 4 sewage treatment plants. And water rates have gone sky high because New York City is, as the gentleman George mentioned, these water protection in the reservoirs costs a lot of money. And they did build this treatment plant for the program. It was estimated at $900 million. The cost today is over $3 billion, and you're paying for that through your water. And another thing you ought to ask your municipalities: if your municipality exceeds the per capita rate of New York City, so let's say, as Dolph said, say New York City uses 150 gallons per capita. If your village or town uses 160, you get a 25% surcharge because you're using more water than the city. And you're going to find out from the municipality why, if that's the case, you're using more water and what's the conservation measures your village or town may be using. Not using. See, the city went from 1.5 billion gallons down to 1.1 billion gallons over a 10-year period when they went to universal metering and many other conservation measures. That was when the Bronx was burning and all these abandoned buildings had their water mains just running out down the street, and it's all been fixed. That's why it's 400 million gallons a day less. Now, in terms of getting down to co-ops.
Cesar, you got 2 minutes left.
All right, I'm just going to wrap up with co-op stuff. Now, all you presidents probably know all this stuff, but make sure your oil tanks are in shape. Make sure they get inspections. Do the inspections of your units, because the tiles in the bathroom, if they're bad, they leak downstairs and they create problems. Catch basins. We put these steel plates on the catch basins and eliminated our raccoon problem. They're very useful. There's a guy over here that will talk to you. We bought it from. Very effective. And we buy a lot of our stuff on eBay, the spare parts for our pumps, the couplers, and the bushings. They're very expensive if you go to plumbing, but if you go on eBay, we bought like 20 couplers for $10 instead of $1,000 from a plumbing supplier. What else? Oh, you got to keep your gutters clean, and any kind of water damage, you got to get at it right away, because it just destroys everything if you don't fix it. Thank you.
Those of you who remember the January 1986 issue of Impact, which I had the pleasure of being executive editor at the time. This is before Jeff. It was a special focus on engineering, and all on my own, I recounted the 10 largest, most grandest engineering feats at the time, of all time in U.S. history. And of course, there was the Erie Canal, and there was the New York State Croton, the water supply system. But one of the ones that always fascinated me, speaking of water, was if it wasn't for, and I can't imagine how engineers did this, that's why I admire you guys so much. The flow of the Chicago River was somehow, in Charlton Heston Moses grand fashion, reversed. So instead of all the sewage and crud going into Lake Michigan and killing it with toxins and crap and everything, they reversed the flow of the Chicago River so that it flowed into the Mississippi and all that crud went down to the Gulf of Mexico. But these were grand projects that captured the imagination of the people involved. And I guess at one time people were quite willing to pay for these wonderful grand projects that had a palpable benefit or benefits at the end of the line. I keep on going back to this long period of time when gasoline has been cheap, relatively speaking. And what would it have been for Congress, Democrat or Republican, I'm talking about maybe the past 8-10 years, Congress to tack on an additional 10 cents, 15 cents, 20 cents on a gallon of gasoline? Would we really have felt it? And yet, as I understand it, the National Infrastructure Fund, and certainly many state infrastructure funds, I think New Jersey being the more prominent, are virtually empty or near bankrupt. So, all that, time is precious. So all of that time when we could have been replenishing the infrastructure fund, even so far as roads and bridges, that time we will never have again. And somewhere along the line, in preparation for this, of course, I have a memory like Kramer in Seinfeld. It's all up here, but then, of course, when I want to draw upon it, it's not there. But I think what costs, let's say, $1 trillion now, in very short order, in a few years, it's going to cost double that. And, time and money are wasted, basically. So in a way, as I said, I kind of share my colleague Maggie's consternation. That's a word I haven't used in 20 years. Consternation over infrastructure. Well, we'll take some questions, and Ken Nelson, you have the first question, as promised.
Okay.
Please stand so we can all hear you.
Okay, one comment, first of all, is I always wonder about how much of the money, for instance, that gets collected in the gas taxes actually goes to infrastructure, and how much gets sucked off by the government in, for other purposes. And I'm wondering if the infrastructure funds, somebody may be able to respond to that, but that's not really my question. But I have another.
Should we consider that question number one? Because then you're only allowed one question.
Okay, that's not my question. I happen to know in, especially the old sections of Yonkers, is that they have combination sewers, and so the water and sewer goes. I was shocked to find out one of my buildings was a connection. I said, "My God, are we violating anything?" And somebody says, "No, this street is." One of the guys who knew it says, "This street has combination sewers." And it goes down, I'm sure, to the sewage treatment plant in Yonkers. And how many more places have those combination sewers, and are there plans to get rid of them?
Cesare.
There's a very small section in Yonkers, you're correct, that has combined sewers.
Yeah.
It's the only place in Westchester that has combined sewers.
Really? Yeah.
Newburgh has combined sewers. Kingston has combined sewers, and Poughkeepsie have combined sewers. And with technology and the use of the overflow weirs, there's adjusting weirs. The first flush, which has the most contamination, the early rain that washes what the raccoon left behind in the street, that gets captured in the collection system. And for the most part, it solves some of the problems on those communities. Now, getting back to Yonkers, when there's an overflow, there is a treatment system. There's swirl concentrators. There are centrifuges run by the power of the water going through.
Right.
and they swirl and spin the solids out, and it's disinfected. And the first flush gets captured. The Yonkers plant is 100 million gallons current flow, but it's designed for 120. So most of the water, sewage with the excess water from this small section of Yonkers does get treated in the treatment plant. And the centrifuges there's two of them, so that if you had one big one, it would take a lot of flow before they started spinning. So there's two on top of each other, and the little one starts going rather early, and it spins out the solids and gets them disinfected. So it's not just dumping raw sewage.
Right, but there's no plans to kind of try to...
Well, any reconstruction, like all that building down there, anytime you put a new sewer in, it has to be separated.
Right.
So but there's no plan for retrofitting the dual systems. Other than when you build new, you replace it with a single pipe. We've had a situation, the guy objected to it. It was single pipe, and he was building in the middle. We made put two pipes in. And he said, well, they're both going to come back together. I said, well, someday when the next guy builds, we'll have two pipes.
For all the babies out there and the tush wipes and everything, I think I was reading a combination system in Baltimore where the supposedly biodegradable Pampers wipes and Kleenex wipes, whatever, created a solid, like 20-foot thick block of this stuff in Baltimore that I think they're considering. I don't know what the solution of that was or what they're considering, but it's one big clog in one of the big sewer where I think they're considering dynamite or something because the stuff doesn't biodegrade. Gene DeResta.
Oh, one more thing. The entire city of New York is combined sewer. So it only takes about an eighth of an inch of rain to go over.
Let me just add the words of Chuck Lesnick that Westchester County was built on a system where the effluent of the affluent is passed down, and we have to create those systems to fix that. And that's just the topography and the geography of the county. And it really does come back down to the locals that actually have to suffer that cost.
And when there was a proposal for I think the excess capacity in Peekskill, I think, to take on, this was years ago, to take on some sewer capacity from Yorktown, Peekskill said, we want our effluent, we don't want Yorktown's effluent. Kind of like reminiscent of a previous example mentioned here. So, there often isn't clear thinking or any thinking. Gene?
I just have a comment and then I have a question. The comment relates to what you were saying, Albert, about the cleverness of the engineers in Chicago to take the sewage and put it down to the Mississippi. Other municipalities and cities did the same thing. And the end result is now the Gulf of Mexico, the border, is dead. The ocean is dead. The dead zone. So that very clever thinking turned out not to be. And now we've got a monumental problem, environmental problem, along the entire coast of the Louisiana, Texas, and just put that out.
Right, it has to go somewhere. So Lake Michigan being a much smaller body of water compared to the Gulf, they said,
Yeah. Now,
it's the achievement that I'm talking about, the actual engineering achievement.
which I consider short.
Well, it's got to go somewhere, right? Exactly.
So the question relates to a concern, and that has to do with the gas pipe infrastructure. The fact that it's old, and we've got a serious, life-threatening situation in many municipalities where the gas pipes are corroding. Do you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, come on. On that point, Paul Feiner was supposed to join us tonight, and one of the points he made, he said, by the way, he would be happy to meet with us in the future. He mentions that, and I understand that Con Ed is slowly but surely, I don't know how long it's going to take, they are replacing the old diameter gas pipes with larger diameter gas pipes that will be able to, that are more up to the modern service and demands of today as opposed to years ago.
No, I think they're sleeving some of the pipes,
Yeah.
some of the old pipes.
Yeah, certainly the roadways, the roadways are shifting.
Putting in smaller pipes at a higher.
Yeah,
Material pipes.
the heavy construction laborers, Local 60, which is based in Hawthorne, has a very ambitious program to train and certify construction workers, laborers, to do gas work, because the amount of work that Con Ed is going to be putting out over the next 5 years to do exactly that is extraordinary. They actually built a new training center up in the Brewster area to get the workers up to speed on the needs of natural gas improvement and repair. And you can see it all over the Westchester, you go through White Plains, any of the cities you see it. So from the standpoint of what's underground with Con Ed, they are right on top of it. As far as what's above ground, somebody asked me how bad it was in Westchester, and I said, Con Ed has more damaged poles than a rehab center in Washsaw. I thought that was good.
Racist.
You know, there was a time when, maybe I've watched too many movies, but there was a time when in the conversion of gas to electric, I think the Edison Electric Company single-handedly put the electric lines underneath Manhattan as a start. And maybe that is ultimately the way to go, but again, that comes with a heavy price. Not another joke, please.
To answer your plea for the gas tax, so it's 18.4 cents on a gallon of gas nationally goes to the Highway Trust Fund, and that's been there since 1993. We have argued to increase that, and we actually had an infrastructure conference at a college several years ago, and Richard Brodsky was the first one to say, look, I will raise the gas tax. I will put a penny, 2 pennies, 7 cents into a higher gas tax. But then you've got to vote for me. You've got to watch my back in the next election, because my opponent will come along and say, I raise taxes. And that money, every 7 cents went for $100 million of repairs in the state every year. The elected officials are unwilling to raise the tax. So that's why we're at 18.34 cents a gallon now. And it's why the Tappan Zee Bridge is still $5. We got this great new bridge, right? Wide lanes, better inclines, and better engineering. And they still haven't raised the toll on the bridge. I think they should have raised it, as you said. Bring it along so that you have revenue in the system. And you would never have felt it.
We're coming on to 8:40. I would ask you all, first of all, to thank our panel. Thank